What Does It Mean to Be an American Project? By Charlie Spinelli, American Studies 1. Over the course of the year in American Studies 1, we have learned about several American historical figures as well as several American figures in literature. Several of these figures have clearly displayed the civic value of courage. From these, I chose 2 figures from American history and 2 figures from American literature, who I thought best fit the civic value of courage. I chose George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Atticus Finch, and Antonia Shimerda. Courage is defined as the power or quality of dealing with or facing danger, fear, or difficulty. This is Ralph Waldo Emerson's description of courage. Whatever you do, you need courage. Whatever course you decide upon, there is always someone to tell you that you are wrong. There are always difficulties arising that tempt you to believe your critics are right. To map out a course of action and follow it to an end requires some of the same courage that a soldier needs. Peace has its victories, but it takes brave men and women to win them. End quote. George Washington was the first President of the United States of America. He was also the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War. He was one of the founding fathers of the United States and a very important figure in American history. On April 30th, 1789, George Washington, standing on the balcony of Federal Hall on Wall Street in New York, took his oath of office as the first President of the United States. Washington was born in 1732. He was the first child of Augustine Washington. He was born into a Virginia planter family where he learned all the aspects of being an 18th century gentleman. Washington had 2 main interests, which included military arts and Western expansion. Washington was first commissioned a lieutenant in 1754. His first military contact was when he fought in what grew into the French and Indian War. During the years from 1759 to the outbreak of the American Revolution, Washington looked over his lands around Mount Vernon and served in the Virginia House of Burgesses. Washington married a widow named Martha Dandridge Custis. Washington felt himself exploited by British merchants and angered by British regulations. In Philadelphia in May 1775, the Second Continental Congress was created. Washington was one of the Virginia delegates. During this time, he was elected Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, during July 1775, Washington took command of his badly trained troops and embarked upon a war that lasted 6 long years. Washington's best-known strategy against the British was to harass them. He reported this to Congress: "We should on all occasions avoid a general action, or put anything to the risk, unless compelled by a necessity, in which we ought never to be drawn." End quote. After a long fight that Washington refused to give up on, forced the surrender of Cornwallis at Yorktown in 1781 with the help of the French. Washington realized that the nation under its Articles of Confederation was not functioning the way it should be. This led to him becoming a large part in the steps leading to the Constitutional Convention at Philadelphia in 1787. After the new Constitution was ratified with the help of Washington, the Electoral College elected Washington as the first President of the United States of America. Washington lived for less than 3 years of his retirement at Mount Vernon before he died of a throat infection on December 14, 1799. Washington clearly displays the civic value of courage through all the situations he faced, including disasters and retreats. His courage made him look like a natural leader, and people followed him because of this. In the wars of 1775 to 1777, Washington led his men against British forces. Although Washington lost several wars, he refused to surrender his men in all of them. He fought until the end. This truly justifies how courageous of a leader he was. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States. Lincoln led us through a major crisis the United States faced. The American Civil War. Lincoln led us through some of the United States' most remarkable improvements, including preserving the Union, abolishing slavery, and strengthening the economy. Abraham Lincoln was born February 12, 1809. He was the second child of Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Lincoln. He lived in a one-room log cabin on the Sinking Spring Farm in Harding County, Kentucky. Lincoln warned the South in his inaugural address when he stated, "In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of the Civil War. The government will not assail you. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it." End quote. Lincoln viewed secession as wrong and illegal. He was willing to use force to defend federal law and the Union. When Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumner and forced their surrender, Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers. 4 more slave states rejoined the Confederacy, but 4 remained within the Union. This was what marked the start of the Civil War. Lincoln married Mary Todd and had 4 boys. Lincoln ran against Stephen A. Douglas for senator in 1858. He lost the election due to racism from the South. Although, in debating with Douglas, he gained a national reputation which led him to being the President of the United States in 1860. During his time in office, Lincoln built the Republican Party into a strong national organization. On January 1, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which stated that all those enslaved in Confederate territory to become forever free. Lincoln made sure that the United States realized that the Civil War had a much deeper problem that most Americans anticipated. He stated this unforgettable line in the Gettysburg Address, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, but this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. End quote. Lincoln won re-election in 1864. As the end of the war came near, Lincoln planned for peace and encouraged Southerners to stand down and rejoin the Union. This was a very generous action considering the damage Southerners caused the United States. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater in Washington by John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln's courage is indescribable. Lincoln displays the civic value of courage because he fights against racism and the ignorance that surrounds him. Lincoln was willing to die for the country and was willing to do anything in order to preserve the Union, abolish slavery, and strengthen the economy. Lincoln fought to the end in every situation and was willing to forgive the South. Atticus Finch from Harper Lee's novel To Kill a Mockingbird was a lawyer in the town of Macomb, Alabama in the early 1900s. He was also the father of Jim and Scout Finch. Atticus Finch clearly has different ideas compared to the other people within his town, who are against racial equality. Atticus Finch risked how people viewed him, his professional reputation, and even his safety to defend a black man falsely accused of raping a white woman. Facing a racist society like the one depicted in Macomb is an act of courage alone. Atticus fights against the ignorance surrounding him and still manages to teach his children not to be racist or to act out in violence. Atticus shows his children that you can't truly understand a person unless you are that person. He explains this when he states, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." End quote. Atticus teaches his children about the ugly things in the world, but he refuses to keep them away from these things because he knows that one day in the near future they will have to face these bad things and nothing can stop that. Atticus teaches his children to show respect to others and shows them what true courage really is. Throughout the book, this is Atticus's main goal, to teach his own children to become good people. He doesn't want them to grow up with hatred against African Americans, even though most of his town shares this hatred towards them. Throughout the novel, we see that Atticus has to explain a lot of the racist things Scout and Jim hear around town. A lot of the town becomes angry at Atticus' entire family because he is fighting for an African American accused of raping a white woman mentioned earlier. The town resents his family and children for this and often refer to their father as nothing but a no-good nigger lover. End quote. Jim and Scout are forced to deal with the anger and hatred that surrounds them towards African Americans. Atticus's children attend a trial and Atticus proves Tom Robinson, the African American accused of rape, innocent. The all-white jury still declares him guilty of rape and sentences him life to prison. At this time, it was nearly impossible for an African American to get out of court innocent just due to the racism. Jim and Scout don't understand why someone who didn't do anything wrong would be charged with an awful crime they never committed. Atticus tries to explain to the children about the racism around them and how some things in life are just not fair. Atticus Finch was willing to risk his entire reputation and his own safety in order to stand up for what was right. This meant protecting an African American falsely accused of raping a white woman in a community that was completely ignorant to racial equality and justice. Doing this in a town like Macomb shows how courageous of a man Atticus Finch truly is. Antonia Shimerda is the focus of My Antonia by Willa Cather. Antonia moves to Nebraska, specifically Blackhawk, from Bohemia with her entire family. Antonia is intelligent, optimistic, loyal, and kind-hearted. Antonia loves Jim Burden, whom is her childhood friend she grows up with, as a younger brother. But Jim loves Antonia in a deeper way. The novel is about Jim's recollection of his life and time spent with and without Antonia. Antonia's main struggles throughout the novel involve her life as an immigrant and the suicide of her beloved father, Mr. Shimerda. Antonia struggles as an immigrant and feels different than everyone else. Her family struggles to eat and survive in general. Their struggle for money and her father's death forces Antonia to start to work on the farm day and night. Her life changes completely. Her simple childhood, or easygoing childhood, soon comes to an end. Later on in the novel, Antonia moves to Blackhawk to work for the Harlings. While in Blackhawk, Antonia is judged harshly due to her love for dancing or partying. She is viewed by the community as easygoing. The next struggle Antonia is forced to face is when her fiancé leaves her and forces her to raise a child on her own. Antonia displays the civic value of courage because she fights through several hardships in her life and she never gives up. She gives life everything she has and tries to live to the fullest. She faces her fears and moves on. Antonia lives a hard life, but her courage gets her through all the hardships life throws at her. She ends up doing all right for herself and raises a family on a beautiful farm with her husband. So, what does it mean to be an American? Well, that's a question that can be answered through a year of American history and literature. I've answered the question for viewing the courage George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Atticus Finch, and Antonia Shimerda had. Winston Churchill once said, "Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen."